What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Michael Augello and Adam Kierszenblat of the Hockey News. We've got lots to talk about today, including an actual trade to announce. But before we get to all of that, want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, we're going to start it off with a trade to talk about. The Chicago Blackhawks traded defenseman Connor Murphy to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for a 2028 second round pick. So, Murphy, 32 years old, he's in the final season of a 4-year, $17.6 million contract, so carries about 4.4 million AAV. The Blackhawks are going to be retaining 50% of his contract with the trade as well. Murphy has 13 points in 60 games this season. He led the Blackhawks in blocked shots as well. So, Mike, overall, what do you think of the deal for the Oilers? Do you think that Murphy is going to be enough to help them improve their defensive game? Because this is an Oilers team that we've talked about at length on the show that needs a lot of TLC on the back end.
Yeah, he's a very unspectacular defenseman. He's a veteran. He's a righty. They're getting him at half price, but this is sort of a half measure by Stan Bowman. It's like Cody Ceci 2.0, or it's replacing Brett Kulak, who they traded away to get Tristan Jarry. It's not a guy who should be in your top four, and if you're a really good team, he won't be in your top four. But if you're talking about him on the right side on the bottom pairing, he's not going to do you a lot of harm. He can kill penalties. He's a big body, but there was talk about them going after Justin Falk or going after Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and I don't think they had the assets or were willing to trade the assets necessary to get those players. They have a 2027 first-round pick. They have a 2026 second-round pick. They have prospects like Ike Howard and Matthew Savoy. They didn't trade any of those players in this deal. They're reportedly looking in on a third line center. Maybe they're waiting and holding those prospects back for that player. But this is sort of an okay move, but not a great move.
Adam, what do you think of the trade for the Oilers? Do you think it's going to be enough?
For me, like I get what the Oilers are doing. It's always good to have a little bit of insurance, especially if you plan on going on a long run, which obviously the Oilers do. But they need, I don't think right shot defenseman was really their biggest need at the moment. You can give out second round picks, but eventually you run out. You can't trade a 2035 second round pick, right? You got to really be strategic, and especially with the fact that there's not going to be a huge market. They need depth scoring. We just saw what happened to Andrew Mangiapane, right? That was supposed to be their depth scoring option. Trent Frederick has kind of disappeared off the map, and they brought in a defenseman, but Tristan Jarry has been one of the worst goaltenders in the league since he's been acquired. Draisaitl before the Olympics, we saw his his, I guess, passionate plea, somebody please step up, doesn't matter who. I just think that they had bigger fish to fry than necessarily bringing in a right shot defenseman. And remember, they had a good right shot defenseman in Troy Stetcher, and they let him, they put him on waivers. So, I mean, I really don't understand what the Oilers are doing this year. It just feels like they haven't built the proper roster for a third run at a cup, and it's going to be the McDavid and Draisaitl show. And I mean, they've gone to 2 cup finals. Now they've done the Olympics. Will they have enough gas to go on another run this season?
Well, we will see. Of course, Mike, you, I think, accurately referred to Connor Murphy as an unspectacular defenseman. I think the same cannot be said for Matthew Schaefer. He had 2 goals on Sunday night against the Florida Panthers for the New York Islanders. He's now at 20 goals. So he set the record for most goals by an 18-year-old defenseman in NHL history last week. So doing very well for himself in New York. Mike, considering the remarkable season that Matthew Schaefer has had at such a young age as well, what do you think his ceiling is as a point producer in this league?
And ironically, the record that he broke was Phil Housley, who did it with Buffalo back in 1982. And I was 15 years old when that happened, but I talked to a veteran reporter, and he told me that Housley played a few weeks at center, so maybe that sort of augmented his totals. He didn't get all of them as a defenseman, but I mean, Schaefer's fantastic. He has just jumped into the sort of the stratosphere. I mean, I think he's a runaway winner of the Calder, and if it wasn't for Hughes, Makar, and probably Zach Werenski, he could be a contender for the Norris as well. I mean, that's how impressive he's been. I mean, you have to look at him and Lane Hudson as the two, rising stars in terms of offense on defense. And I don't think there's any limit to him scoring 85, 90 points. He's 18 years old. That's the thing that's sickening. He is this good at 18.
Adam, what do you think this kid's ceiling is? I mean, he really is. He's just a kid. It's easy to forget that with how well he's been doing in his rookie season. But what do you expect here from Matthew Schaefer?
The Schaefer thing is like you add in the extra. Remember, like with Schaefer, he missed a large portion of last year. Like he hadn't played for months, and then he comes into the NHL as an 18-year-old and starts lighting up the league. Like, I think that the Islanders have put him in a great position. They're managing his matchups very well. They're not kind of giving him, putting him over his head. And there's a reason why, he was at least in the discussion for Team Canada at the Olympics. But I mean, the future is bright on the island with Matthew Schaefer. Defensemen don't score 20 goals. It doesn't matter if you're a rookie or not. Unless you're really like Cale Makar or Zach Werenski, defensemen nowadays don't necessarily score. Or I guess Darren Radish, right? You get the one odd off sometimes, but defensemen don't score 20 goals. So to be doing it at 18 is pretty special. And I mean, I remember going back a couple of years ago where Schaefer wasn't really on the map from a draft prospect. We knew about him, but it was all the talk about Cole Yzerman and the Team USA is coming up, and then Matthew Schaefer just kind of has passed everybody, and it's pretty spectacular to watch.
Well, of course, definitely spectacular to watch what's happening with Matthew Schaefer, and lots of good things for him ahead. Also ahead, though, is the trade deadline coming up at the end of the week. And on Saturday, Elliot Friedman reported that New York Rangers center Vincent Trocheck is actually one of the top centers being targeted ahead of this week's trade deadline. Of course, teams always in need of center depth. The Rangers looking to be a seller here at the deadline. Trocheck is 32 years old. He's got 3 years left after this season with a $5.25 million cap hit. So certainly more than a rental there. He also put up 38 points in 45 games last year. So, Mike, what team makes the most sense to you as a potential landing spot for Trocheck?
Well, I'll give you a few of them. Obviously, he has made it clear that he does not want to go west of the Mississippi. He apparently has said no to teams like Los Angeles or Utah who are looking for center help. Seattle as well. The Minnesota has been rumored out there for a while, but I think that's too far west because his family's in the East. The three teams that make the most sense are the Boston Bruins, who have been looking for a center help, maybe a number two, and he's sort of a poor man's Patrice Bergeron. He's a very good face-off guy, very good defensive player, decent offensively, penalty killer. The team that we've been talking about all year in terms of a second-line center, the Montreal Canadiens, and they've got the young assets and draft picks that they could make a package deal that would make sense for Chris Drury. And the other one is the Carolina Hurricanes, because they're in on everything. They always are. Now, he's been in Carolina before, so I don't know whether he's going to go back there or want to go back there, but there is a crying need to add some forward depth on that team as well as defensive help. So if I had to pick one over the other two, I would say Boston.
A poor man's Patrice Bergeron. I like that. Adam, what do you think? Any other teams you'd throw in there?
With Montreal, I just wonder if he would actually want to go and play in Canada. That's always a question. But I mean, like, you know, I was gonna say like Tampa or Florida, but they just don't have the cap space to make that happen. But like that just, you know, like we saw what happened with Brad Marchand at the last second last year. Like Florida pulling some form of something to get Vinny Trocheck would make too much sense. But I mean, like, you know, I wonder about the New Jersey Devils. Like, he doesn't have to move too far. The New Jersey Devils have been rumored in like every player at this point. Like they want to try and do something. Like, I don't think the New Jersey Devils think that they're out of it yet. Now, you know, the question is, you already have Hischier and Hughes down the middle, but like having Vinny Trocheck, Hischier and Vinny Trocheck down the middle would be in like that's the center depth, right? Like that's playoff center depth right there. But also like I loved Vinny Trocheck's son's comment where he was like, well, you know, you're getting traded, but I'm not. Like, talk about some emotional damage from your kid there while you're trying to deal with potentially moving to a new NHL city.
Yeah, I think his son Leo said, I'm going to stay here. Wherever you go, I'm going to stay here because I play for a hockey team here and I'm not getting traded. So good perspective to have there for him, and good head on his shoulders for sure. Mike, we got to talk about the Buffalo Sabres now. Of course, your neck of the woods there. The Sabres picked up right where they left off before the Olympic break. They've won 3 games in a row. They are now in unfamiliar territory. Their position in the standings would suggest that they should be buyers at the deadline this year. So that is not a position they have been in a very long time. So with your perspective here, where do you think their biggest upgrade could be if they are going to look to be buyers at the deadline? And do you think there are any targets in particular that make sense for them?
Well, Jarmo Kekalainen has a history of making splashy moves. Ironically, everything that they're being rumored to or being connected to in terms of rumors does not strike me as splashy. They had 4 scouts, including assistant GM Mark Bergman, in Toronto yesterday to watch the Flyers-Leafs game. And the rumor was that they were looking at Rasmus Ristolainen, former Sabre who had been traded to the Flyers back in 2021. He, again, right shot. But I think the reasoning for that, for them potentially being interested in him, is because on the right side, the Sabres have Michael Kesselring, who's been hurt 3 or 4 times this year, and Connor Timmins, who's coming back from a broken leg. But Ristolainen is like the Samuel L. Jackson character in that one movie with Bruce Willis, Mr. Glass. He breathes and he breaks a bone or does something. So it's just that, you know, I don't think it's a fit. I think they might have been in on a Connor Murphy, but I see them going for like a low grade righty like Luke Schenn. I don't think they're going to make a splashy move on defense. I think they're just going to get some depth. And I think they love the chemistry of the team right now. So I don't know if they really want to significantly mess with that.
Adam, where do you think the Sabres could stand to improve their roster if they were to become buyers at the deadline?
I think the biggest question evolving, you know, surrounding the Buffalo Sabres is, what is Alex Tuch's future? Like, I think you got to sort that out before you can really decide what you want to do. Because if Alex Tuch says, hey, listen, I want to sign an extension, I want to be here for a couple of years, then maybe you can shift your focus to somebody with term. You know, like we know Nazem Kadri's name has been mentioned time and time again. We know, you know, here in Vancouver, Elias Pettersson's name has been connected to the Buffalo Sabres in the past. Like, if Tuch wants to stay, then that changes your whole output on kind of how this trade deadline wants to go. I don't know if Tuch's going to give you an answer in the next couple days, but like that's really the key. And like, if he says, hey, I'm leaving at the end of the season, then maybe you go and you try to get those players with no term or 1 year left. But if he says, hey, I'm going to sign you for 8 years, then you go out and you get that corner piece player that can really impact you for 4 and 5 years down the road.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Tuch is not going to give the Sabres an answer. He hasn't given them an answer all year. The Bartletts and even either Kevin Adams or Kekalainen have had discussions all year. They seem to be at loggerheads. Tuck wants the Adrian Kempe deal, which is over $10 million. The Sabres haven't budged in terms of getting anywhere close to $10 million, reports are indicating. So I think the Sabres are going to keep him as an own rental, and then probably he walks away in free agency, which I think is dumb, but I understand them not wanting to screw up the chemistry and make the playoffs for the first time in 14 years, but to let a guy who is extremely valuable walk away for nothing because you want to make the playoffs is just not smart.
Well, and you have to wonder, too, from Tuck's perspective, how much is this season's outcome going to impact his decision on whether or not he wants to come back? So probably all the more reason for him not to give an answer to the Sabres anytime soon until they see kind of what their playoff fate is. We've mentioned both of these teams already on the show, sort of in passing. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper. Two teams that are going to be looking to buy, presumably at this year's deadline, are the Boston Bruins and the Utah Mammoth. So both of their GMs, Don Sweeney and Bill Armstrong, respectively, they've had interviews this week. Both gave pretty similar perspectives on how they're viewing the rental market at this year's deadline. So Armstrong said, where we're at right now in Utah, rentals don't make a lot of sense. I think for us, we did a lot of our depth building in the summer, putting a lot of the pieces in place. Then Sweeney in Boston said, it's about having an eye towards obviously this year and moving forward as well. We spent likely too much collateral assets to try and win in previous seasons. So when you look at this in this kind of perspective, Mike, do you think that this has to do with the specific positions that the Mammoth and the Bruins are in right now in their respective playoff races? Or do you think this could be sort of a greater indication of how the GMs across the league are approaching the deadline this year?
I think it's more where those two teams are. If you look at the Bruins, I mean, they did the reset last year. They traded Marchand. They traded Brandon Carlo. They traded Charlie Coyle. They recouped a lot of draft picks. They got prospects like Fraser Minton from Toronto. You know, they drafted James Hagens in the first round of this upcoming draft. And, you know, they've turned things around and they've been really impressive, but they're not a Stanley Cup contender, and it doesn't make any sense to trade, you know, the first round pick that you got from Florida for Marchand for a short-term move. I mean, if they go after Trocheck, then, you know, and he's got term left on his deal, then that makes sense because it's more than just this year. I mean, as for Utah, you know, there's been rumors of them being in on the Robert Thomas talks with St. Louis. They've got a boatload of young prospects and draft picks. You know, somebody like Simashev, who has played in the NHL this year, is now playing in the American Hockey League. I mean, you're going to be talking like a monstrous package for Thomas to get a number one or number two center. So, I mean, that would be worth it because he's locked up, I think, for 4 or 5 years. But they're not going to give up significant young prospects or draft picks for guys who could just simply walk out the door.
Adam, I'm curious, what do you think of the answers that were given by Sweeney and Armstrong about the deadline? Do you think that's going to be part of sort of a larger shift in the mindset at the deadline? Or do you think, like Mike, that it really has more to do with where specifically their two teams are at?
Well, I think like we have to, you know, talk about the market a little bit just from a player perspective. Like, you know, if you're looking at unrestricted free agents, like the fact that Connor Murphy was probably a top 5, you know, unrestricted free agent heading into the offseason says something. Like, who are the top guys now? Like Alex Tuch, probably, Evgeny Malkin, Alex Ovechkin. Like, there aren't a ton. Like, these are big names, but these guys aren't moving, right? Like, there aren't a ton of players that are, you know, going to be players that teams are interested in just because they have no term left over. Like, when you look at Utah, like Nick Schmaltz, his name has been out there, but why would Utah sell him, right? Like, they're in a playoff push right now. So the market is what it is at this point. It's very hard to actually find, you know, a ton of value, which is definitely going to impact like what type of trades we see. But yeah, just from a perspective like Boston, you know, Boston I I don't want to say they've done a rebuild. I would say it's kind of like a retool, like because the Minton has stepped up, like they have some pretty good prospects. So, I mean, why do you want to mess with the future now? And then on Utah's side, like I know that their owner is very motivated to make the playoffs, but Utah is a really good young team. Like they got some pretty good prospects as well. So it really is do we want to try and, do to like maybe win around this year at the detriment of our team in a couple of years, because especially with Utah, like they're going to have to go through Colorado, Dallas, or Minnesota, right? Like those are some pretty good teams. So like if I'm both GMs, I'm not making like if somebody comes up and it's like, hey, a third line center for a third round pick, okay, but I'm not spending a first round pick or more on really any of the rentals in this market.
Yeah, weird spot to be in with the playoff race being what it is too. Still very wide open for this late in the season. I think a lot of it being because of the condensed schedule, because of the Olympic break and all of that. And like you said, lots of the top free agents already off the market. Lots of teams got their guys locked up long term before the new CBA kicked in. So the rental market, like you said, Adam, kind of is what it is. Adam, want to stick with you here first. I want to ask about the Canucks. We've talked about trades, of course, with the deadline coming up. There have been a lot of reports about Tyler Myers, the potential of him being traded. But the Canucks now, of course, have the worst record in the NHL. It would make sense if they were listening to offers on other players to kind of fully establish themselves as a rebuilding team. Which players, in your opinion, Adam, on the Canucks roster should be moved out at this year's deadline if the Canucks do want to maximize their assets as they head into the draft and the offseason?
Well, it's interesting. So we're working on an article that will come out in a couple days about like what the Canucks do and what the equivalent trade grade will be. So just to give you a preview, there's Evander Kane, Teddy Bluger, and David Kampf. If they don't move two of those three guys, it's an automatic F for the trade deadline. Doesn't matter what else they do. Unless they make like a Elias Pettersson or Brock Besser, like Jake DeBrusk trade, but they have to move those three guys. Like a lot of the talk in this market has shifted to, oh, there's so much noise around this team, but nothing's going to get done because teams don't necessarily want to pull off these massive moves for underperforming players during the season. So a lot of it's going to be pushed to the offseason. Like that's kind of the mood right now in Vancouver. But I mean, like the Tyler Myers situation is just getting weird at this point. Like you've sat him for 3 games. You don't usually sit a player for 3 games. And then he had the whole, so for people who don't know, Tyler Myers, when he does warmups, he doesn't wear a helmet. Like he's like a lot of players who don't wear a helmet. So the first game he was scratched, he didn't wear a helmet. And then all of a sudden in the last 2 games, he's taken warmups, he's worn a helmet. And like, it's just, there's just so much weirdness is probably the best way to say it around Tyler Myers. Like everybody knows about the Detroit rumor right now. Like everybody knows that he doesn't necessarily want to go there, or else he would have already been in Detroit by now. Like a lot of the talk is around Dallas. He was born in Texas. He has family there. Like we'll see if Dallas wants to bring him in. It's just there's so many rumors. It's like every single day a different player is mentioned, but yeah, we'll just see. Like I'm not expecting anything outside of the 3. Like maybe a Connor Garland gets moved just because he doesn't have trade protection up until July 1st, and teams like him. But I mean, if you're a team right now, what's the harm in waiting till the offseason and when you get these guys on a full clean slate and everything? Like when you're underperforming, that's what happens to your value. It disappears in the trade market.
Mike, I'm curious on your perspective here. Do you agree with those kind of the big 3 that Adam mentioned, or are there any other players on the Canucks roster right now who you think should be moved at this year's deadline to maximize their assets?
Well, I mean, first, I agree with Adam, and I think it goes across the board with any team that's out of the playoff race. Any rental you sell, no matter what. If you may have to retain 50% of Evander Kane's salary, which is over $5 million. You might find a team that's desperate for scoring help. I don't know. If they have a retention slot left? I know one of them is used on Oliver Ekman-Larsson. That was the buyout. I'm sorry. But, just move those guys. I'm sure there's interest on a couple of them. Get whatever you can for them. It may not be what you're expecting. But the one that I've heard the most about is Garland. There's been talk about him in the Bruins. That's a player with term on his contract. So, and they have prospects. I'm not saying that they're going to do this, but Fraser Minten is from Vancouver. So I'm sure there's always those connections with Vancouver boys coming back home. And I'm sure that would be a desire of the Canucks to bring a young BC native back there. The Myers thing is weird, but you don't give that guy a no move clause and not expect him to use it. Every player's got a no move clause is going to use it. Now it drops to a 12-team no trade on July 1st. So, if he says, I'm not going to Detroit on July 2nd, they could trade him to Detroit. So he at a certain point is going to have to be reasonable and say, I will go somewhere. But I think he's going to wait until the last minute and say, maybe I'll waive at 2:59 on Friday if it means going someplace better than or more acceptable to me than Detroit. But he just clearly does not want to play for the Red Wings.
Yeah, interesting to see what'll happen there with Tyler Myers and with the rest of the Canucks. Of course, trade deadline coming up in just a few days, so we'll see where all the chips fall. Before we wrap up today, though, Adam, as our resident CHL expert, got to ask you about the Penticton Vees. They just made history. They have the most wins by an inaugural team in CHL history, 38 wins. So they've already clinched a playoff spot. What can you say about this team and kind of where they're headed? Any big prospects on this team that we should be looking at or keeping tabs on as we look ahead?
Well, Penticton, they have been the story of the WHL and I think the CHL. They're now up to 39 wins. They're going to clinch the BC division. It's one of those, it's a matter of time, unless they go on a 10-game losing streak, which isn't happening. But I mean, Penticton, it was funny because in the off season when we first found out about Penticton and they had that inaugural press conference, Fred Harbison, who's the coach and the GM, said, fans in Penticton we're not going to have as much success as we did in the BCHL because they were winning over 800% of their games, 0.800 win percentage in the BCHL. They were just the dominant team every year. And now they're going to be the second seed in the West. Nobody projected this. And one of the ways that they did it was they brought in the majority of the roster is 19-year-olds, which means that they're going to have to make some serious adjustments next year. But I mean, they're doing it without NHL prospects. They have one drafted prospect and Jacob Kavinska, who was drafted by the New York Islanders. That's it. Most of their roster was basically built through the expansion draft. And then they brought in some players Ryder Evers, who is second on their team in points. He was part of their BCHL team last year. He's their first line center. So it's it really is just a story of, when everybody is on the same page clicking in junior hockey and you have a strong coach and a strong GM who understands the team dynamic, it really does make a difference. Penticton didn't go out and make swings at the deadline because they know they have faith in their team. So it's a great story overall. The South Okanagan Event Center is one of the best arenas in the entire league as well. It's a great run organization. And it's great to see a team that, I mean, when I did my WHL preview, I had them as the 8th seed. Maybe they get in, maybe they don't. I'm happy to be wrong on this one because they have just worked their tails off all season long. And yeah, it's going to be fun to watch them in their first ever playoffs because I know that building is going to be rocking over in Penticton.
That's what it's all about. You love to see stories like that. Of course, if you want to read more about the Penticton Vees, about the NHL trade deadline, or anything else that we've talked about on the show today, please head over to the Hockey News. The Hockey News has been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us and listened to us talking some hockey today. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all new episode on Thursday. In the meantime, for Mike Augello and Adam Kierszenblat, I'm Emma Lingan, and we will see you next time.